Well, good evening, Larry. How are you tonight?
Doing great, Andy. How's everything in the Peach State?
Everything is awesome. Don't you owe me a trip out here?
I believe we are in the process of rescheduling a trip to the Peach State. Yes.
Okay. Do you know when that might happen?
It'll happen hopefully by the year's end.
Well, in a couple of days it's October, so you only have one quarter left.
That's correct.
All right. Well,
But
I'm going to hold you to it. And then Thanksgiving shows up and travel and Christmas, so you really only have about 6 weeks to squeeze it in there.
well, it's not my fault that all hell broke loose at DFW last weekend.
I would be inclined to say it probably is your fault.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you control the weather?
Well, I suppose if we go back to the movie, Oh God, I could play that role. I'm old enough to be George Burns now.
Can you put your hand on the Bible and do the line?
Swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. And he said, so help me.
All right.
Uh,
There we go. Now we just lost all of our listeners for sure.
well, that was one of the funniest movies of all time.
George Burns was definitely a funny character. And for anybody who's younger than me, so if you're under 40 years old, and I'm kind of fudging ages right there, you probably have no idea who George Burns is. He only lived to like 102 or something.
I think he died at 100. But
Okay.
the movie Oh God was released in 1977, so there'd be
Wow.
it's 40 plus years ago. And it starred
Well,
John Denver. So if you
did it really?
heard
Yeah.
of John Denver, he played the person that God reached and decided to connect with Earthlings through John Denver.
Well, then I'm going to make the really cruel joke of saying, hey, if you are familiar with Stone Mountain and the picture thing there on the side of it, that's what John Denver looks like now.
Uh-huh.
So there you go. And here we go. So to thank you to a new patron, Gerald, he's coming in at the supported level, which is fantastic. And I'm glad that your mom is helping you make store call. And also there's a great picture of your grill on your Patreon profile page. So that's pretty awesome. Also, thank you to our other patrons. And thank you for supporting the Registry Matters podcast. It's really humbling that you've taken the time to listen to us knuckleheads ramble, but also extend some financial support to the pod. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Mr. Anonymous sent in a comment. So, Larry, last week you said something about, we were talking about anonymity and your ability to remain anonymous in the public square. And Mr. Anonymous from Tennessee sent in an article from the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And there's a quote in there. It says, anonymity is a shield from the tyranny of the majority. It thus exemplifies the purpose behind the Bill of Rights and of the First Amendment in particular, to protect unpopular individuals from retaliation at the hand of an intolerant society.
I agree with Mr. Anonymous that I wish the Electronic Frontier Foundation success in building the case law that supports anonymity. But the point I was making was that when a person goes out in public, they do not have the expectation of privacy, and they certainly are not anonymous. With all the facial recognition abilities that we have with law enforcement today, practically every state's driver's license database is now electronic facial recognition. That's part of the being Real ID compliant. It would be very unusual that you being out in public, you would have anonymity unless you went around with a hood or something over your face. So the only point I was making is that there's no expectation for privacy if you go out and protest and carry signs, unless you cover your face, and you're not anonymous. That was all. But I agree that protecting people's anonymity is important, because otherwise the unpopular things would be snuffed out.
I assume if you were out in public with your face covered to some degree, does law enforcement have some authority to have you uncover?
That's a good question. They would be the liberal do-gooders from the ACLU would claim that until they break the law, that they've done nothing wrong, and there would be no basis for police intervention. The police would argue, well, I mean, it was very suspicious because there was 500 people on the street and only 20 of them were covered, and we wanted to know what they were up to, so we wanted to identify them. that would be an interesting test of how that would turn out if the cops did that. Typically, I don't think they request ID or demand ID when a person has their face covered at a planned protest. If they've gone through the process of getting their permit and notifying authorities that they're going to have a protest until they start doing something that's unlawful, that I believe that they're pretty much allowed, at least around here, to have their faces covered.
Not long after I was released, and I still spent a lot of time on foot, going to the store, going to the restaurant or whatever. And a cop pulled up on the side of the road next to me, and he steps out and he says, and he was ridiculously polite, and he said, "May I ask you for your ID?" I resembled somebody that had been accused of something, and he checked my ID. I mean, I willingly gave it to him. I suppose I had the right to say no, F you people. But, so he just looked at it and saw that I wasn't who they thought I was, and he moved on.
You probably did the best thing, because it sounds
no
like
doubt.
that it would have escalated. They would have assumed that you had something to hide. Of course, you would not have necessarily had anything to hide, but they would have taken the refusal that you were up to something, and they would have probably scanned every database they could find and detained you for a couple hours just to teach you a lesson. So it's probably wise that you give them your ID. They could see, unless they suspected the ID was fraudulent, you were not who they were looking for.
Right. All right. And then, so from the last week's episode where we were talking about Judge Kavanaugh and the allegation, a woman, I guess it's a woman, Jackie, wrote a comment on the website. "I guess I don't understand how someone can accuse another and then put the burden of proof on the accused. I thought we were a nation of innocent until proven guilty. And in this case, none of these stories have had anyone provide proof that these acts happened. If this goes through, then anyone can just go to an attorney and make the claim that another person did something to them, even if it's not true. Why is it that no one has come forward with evidence that these acts happened?" Another question not asked by the panel yesterday by Dr. Ford was, why did she pull down her antics on Facebook, just showing how far left she is? What is she afraid of? If the judge did these things, then why were there no evidence found in the previous FBI background checks? I don't believe any of these things happened.
Wow, that's a lot to swallow.
It is.
I think I'll leave the Facebook comment aside and focus on the innocent to proven guilty, which I agree with Jackie, and I think you and I both agree on that's the standard in America. But we're not talking about a criminal court here. This is not a criminal proceeding. But in any proceeding, regardless of whether it's the criminal or civil, the burden is on the party who's making the accusation. I can't think of a situation where the burden is on the accused. In a civil proceeding, although it's a much lower standard, it's not beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a preponderance of the evidence in a civil proceeding. But the accuser always has to prove something. So I agree with Jackie completely that we've gotten ourselves turned upside down, and this has a lot to do with the victims' advocates who've been steadfastly claiming that if we actually require the accuser to come forth with evidence that's re-victimizing them. It's not, or Jackie, it's not a new phenomena here. This has been going on for a long time, that we've been gradually eroding which way the burden is supposed to be, and made it easier and easier to gain convictions. So I agree with Jackie completely on that in terms of the other part about the FBI investigations, the FBI wouldn't have been investigating sexual impropriety unless there was some allegation of sexual impropriety. And I used to do property management, and I dealt with FBI with background checks, not to this level. People need security clearances that don't rise to the level of Supreme Court or Court of Appeals or the U.S. The federal government, president's cabinet, which hopefully those are a little more diligent. But they're not looking at sexual behavior. So without any inkling of sexual impropriety, I don't think it would have come up. But you and I had a conversation before the podcast. I think that may be something that may become a part of background checks going forward, is that maybe the person who's going for highly sensitive positions like federal judgeships, Court of Appeals judgeships, and Supreme Court and cabinet level positions, maybe they need to ask them about their sexual proclivities. It seems like we're
get them to do some sort of psychosexual.
I don't
polygraph?
think we need to go that far, but Andy, you're getting ready to be in a very public arena? Are there any sexual skeletons in your closet? Do you have any peculiar behaviors that you engage in?
But isn't everyone going to answer no to that? Because no one wants to be labeled, oh, that guy likes to suck on toes or something, whatever somebody thinks is a fetish by someone else.
Well, they probably would answer no in most instances, but at least you've tried to find out if there's any. I doubt a person who'd committed what's being alleged here would say that I've done that, but you might be able to get him to say. I mean, he freely admitted that he's a heavy drinker, that he loves his alcoholic beverages. If he had been asked, do you have any, starting at the age of you become sexually active, do you have anything that's? I mean, our country seems to be obsessed over sex. Therefore,
very much so.
Therefore, we need to know, is anything going to come rolling out of here? And he's not going to admit that he's committed a crime. I get that. But he might be like Colonel Hogan, if anybody remembers Bob Crane. He might be willing to admit that he engaged in a lot of swinging behavior. And then once you get that information, you could possibly go digging and ask for people, were you at any of these swinging parties that he was in? Was there anything improper? Did you observe anything improper? Because in the background investigations I've been through, that's one of the things they ask about. They focus a lot on patriotism. Did you notice these people engage in? And I always declined to answer. I told them that part of what I do here is not to make a patriotic judgment on people. I judge them by whether they behave themselves, if they pay their rent, if they destroy our property, and if they're good neighbors. I'm not checking out how many flags they're flying and what they're doing in their off time in terms of patriotic or unpatriotic behavior. I don't have any information on that. We don't keep that on file. But I don't know why this would be so difficult to at least try to find out if they have anything as in the nature of what would be considered a little bit unusual sexual proclivities, and then you could build from that. And people will criticize me for saying that, but it's where we are in the country. We seem to want to know all this type of stuff about people. We seem to be fixated about.
I mean, that's the whole same-sex marriage thing. Why is it any of your business what I do with my junk in somebody else's junk? Why is that your business? It's not.
I know, but boy, you're going to stir up a hornet's nest on that one. But I've made the same argument in terms of what people are doing in their bedroom. If it's between consenting individuals that are of the age of consent, I don't know how it has any impact on you. You could be engaging in wild group sex, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as the group is of age, and that's what they want to be doing. I mean, you could be putting, what do they call those clip-ons they put on they inflict pain? I mean, burning candles, whatever the people do. It's none of my business as long as that's what they want to be doing.
All I want to say is that you just exposed my naive ears to some ideas I'd never even considered.
You don't like burning candle wax?
Let's move on.
In terms of the Facebook, I don't use that platform, so I don't know why people put things up and down. And I mean, you feel free to comment on that, but I would imagine that she's getting a lot of negative feedback from people who are angry with her.
Certainly, she also has, by that same token, though, she has possibly an equal number of people that are in support of her.
Well, I would think that's true. The country seems to be very divided on this.
So I have two scenarios, and I know that everyone is tired of this story, but I have two similar. So Al Franken had allegations made. There were roughly there was a picture of him mock groping a person. I don't even know that he was touching, but that forced him out. And that is a step or two down from the Supreme Court seat, I would guess, as far as hierarchy goes. And the other one that I would like to throw in here is short of the actual conviction of Luke Heimlich, but that happened when he was 14 years old, the baseball pitcher guy. Both of those have been pushed out of professions because of either the conviction or an allegation. And here this man is standing up there with some, from the Al Franken point of view, if you want to go to degrees, he just allegedly touched where Kavanaugh reportedly did something pretty aggressive, and he's still standing up there and possibly will be confirmed. That doesn't seem to jibe with me as far as an equal standard. So same thing with Luke. The MLB decided there's going to be just too much headache for us to carry a sex offender around on our bus. Okay, Al Franken gets booted out, and Kavanaugh is 52% of conservatives say even if the allegations are true that he should be confirmed. That seems very inconsistent to me. Well,
there are some people that are taking interesting positions on this, and I think we're going to talk more about it later. But I do see some inconsistent positions that people are taking that normally are law and order and believe in hanging people by their toes. It's interesting, and I like I say, we'll talk about it a little bit more later. But in the case of Heimlich, I just don't believe there was any collusion by the Major League Baseball as far as the league. I think the American International League. I think it was the individual owners decided that they didn't want to deal with him. But I don't think that baseball there was any directive came down from Commissioner of Baseball saying that this guy can't be signed. I think each team.
No, I totally, I'll agree with that. But same thing with Al Franken. I mean, well, I guess you could call it collusion of there was a mounting number of senators that were like saying it's probably best if you go away. But that's because they didn't want to deal with the baggage of the allegation looming over them as they're trying to retake the House and Senate. Heimlich, MLB saying, the owners saying, we don't want to deal with this baggage. Yet here it is at the Supreme Court level. And they're willing to accept the baggage of an allegation.
But we've learned from the confirmation of Clarence Thomas, we've learned that the baggage pretty much goes away after the confirmation because they're there for life. If he makes it through if Kavanaugh makes it through the confirmation process, 53 years old, he'll outlive me for sure, and he'll be there for life. So I don't think the baggage. There'll be people. Is it possible the Me Too movement might descend on the Supreme Court every day and protest while he's there? It's possible, but I'd be very surprised if they have the staying power to do that for the rest of his career. He's going to be there 30 years, maybe more.
But could you make the reverse argument for Heimlich? He would be a pitcher for 10, 20 years. So then the Me Too movement, people would go harass the team every time they show up to town or whatever?
Well, I think that you've got, in the case of the baseball, you would have all these. I mean, I think there's 32, 34 teams in Major League Baseball.
Like that, sure.
There's
100 and whatever games. Yep.
They play 162 game schedule. I think there'd be enough of a ruckus every time that they went to a city that it would just be too much of a distraction for any team to deal with. With this case with Kavanaugh, he's going to quietly go off and do his work, and I mean, look at Thomas. There's what has been said about him over the last 2.5 decades.
Nothing until this comes up with all the comparisons to it.
Yeah, I bet he's been very quiet on the court. I mean, he says the least of any justice.
Very strange.
I think he's on the court. We won't hear a whole lot about it afterwards, but maybe I'll be surprised. Maybe Me Too will not let go of it.
Hello.
Wake up, Andy.
Oh my God. Why? It's really dark, 30 in the morning. I'm sleeping. What do you want?
Well, I want to talk about the podcast.
Didn't we talk for 90 minutes last night about the podcast?
We did, and we have to start planning the next podcast, and we also have to talk about things on the podcast we just recorded. I had a thought afterwards in regard to Jackie's comment.
And this thought couldn't wait another few hours?
Well, no, because you're about to release the podcast, and I wanted to see if we could do an addendum.
All right. So Jackie, she's the one that talked about innocent until proven guilty and process and how do you accuse somebody so many years later. That's who you're talking about?
That's what I'm talking about, and I agreed with her, except I declined to address the social media part. I didn't have enough information. I felt I could be intelligent. But I've thought about it, and I'm just wondering how she can make that assertion that Blasey Ford's social media has been, what did she say, purged, scrubbed, whatever her words were. I'm wondering how she would know that, because until this situation broke and she came forward, Ms. Ford was known to no one.
Yeah, she's just a college professor.
Well, I mean, but I'm not imagining one of our listeners knew her.
Right.
Which, for you to know that her social media had left us, whatever she's termed it, left us. How would you know that if it's been scrubbed and it's not there? Then you're making an allegation which lacks the basic fundamental evidence that you said was required. This is stuff that you don't know that's being repeated out in the world now, apparently, because I've heard it since the podcast, that that all this leftist stuff and all this stuff has been purged from her social media. But you really don't know that, do you?
My understanding, I'm not on Facebook, I am on Twitter, but if you saw somebody's tweet and then that tweet's no longer there, that doesn't exist. They have removed history, so to speak. So unless you took a screenshot to have for your own records, you wouldn't know it firsthand. You're getting it from another source.
That would be correct, which means that our listener is repeating something that's coming from conservative circles because they're calling it liberal stuff or leftist stuff, which a liberal would not say that. Or liberals don't think of their stuff as being distorted. They think that they're rational, just as the conservatives think they're rational. So the conservatives are saying that all this scrubbing has taken place of all this leftist stuff, but where's the evidence of it? Where is the evidence of the stuff that they're talking about that's so horrible that she's scrubbed because she doesn't want us to know who she is? I would like for that to be produced. Otherwise, it seems a little irresponsible to make the accusation. You're merely parroting what the conservatives are saying without evidence, which is what our listener said that she requires, which is what I require.
Right. I'm still waking up, so I'm trying to funnel these thoughts in something of coherent nature. But thank you for waking me up so early in the morning, and don't ever do this again. Yeah, I think I agree with you, and I'm really happy that you've lost sleep over this as well. Yeah, I mean, I guess I can try and figure out how to put this into the podcast.
Well, you're a genius. You can figure it out, and hopefully, if the evidence exists, like our birth certificate on Trump, maybe the people that have these leftist rants, as they describe them, will show them to us, and we will agree after we see them that they're a leftist or they're normal. But if you look at people's social media, to the extent that I do, they put a lot of stuff on social media.
Oh, yeah.
From what they eat in the morning to mundane is that and where they're going, who they're dating, and who they're voting for. And I guess if you're voting for someone that one of your friends is in disagreement with, maybe that's leftist. I'd just like to see, was she calling for the overthrow of the government? Was she saying that America has problems? Which we say on the podcast all the time, America has problems. I'd just like to know what these horrible leftist rants are that've been removed.
So you're asking Jackie to send us some evidence of what was taken off of her Facebook account?
I think that's a reasonable request, and wherever she's getting it, which I'm assuming is from conservative media sources, they should be responsible enough to have the evidence before they make the accusation, because I know they believe in fundamental fairness and not making assertions that are not true. I would imagine they have the evidence, wouldn't you?
No, I think that's legit. I think that's fair.
That's one basic standards in journalism, is to have evidence to support what you're saying.
I believe I've heard NPR say things like even off of a single source, they would definitely want to have a second and third to corroborate evidence.
So, well, all right. Well, I guess you can go back to bed and sleep your life away.
Thank you. I was up late.
It must be nice to sleep your life away.
Yes, I do what I can.
All right.
Well, I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Alrighty then. Well, let's move on. This is from The Statesman. For some sex offenders, their deal with the state wasn't really a deal. The article profiles a number of people, I think predominantly in Texas, where they were sentenced 30 years ago in the 90s, and they were told by the prosecutor when they signed their deal that, hey, once you do the 10 years or whatever their sentence was, you're done. And then they've come back in behind the scenes, and with the AWA and so forth, they started tacking on these things with the registry and other restrictions. Now they're coming to visit you on Halloween and so forth. And I'm going to try and find where it was said, but somebody ended up even on probation for not, like, he would go spend some time over at a friend's house, maybe a couple days out of the month. And then he ended up back on probation because he wasn't telling them where he was. And, that's what I wanted to remember. So they say in here, well, this is just a civil regulatory scheme. How do you end up back on probation after you've done your time if it's just a civil regulatory scheme? That's my question.
Well, you end up on probation for not complying with the civil regulatory scheme. You get prosecuted for failure to comply. That's the answer.
But you did your time originally. I know that this goes to the core issue of how one of the elements of the registry is unconstitutional because it's ex post facto. You're being punished after the fact. They've changed the rules on you.
Well, but it's not been proven to the satisfaction of all the courts that this is inflicting punishment. Remember, the last time the U.S. Supreme Court opined, there was very little punishment being administered by the state of Alaska,
right.
mailing in a form. And
right.
people just get so uptight and say, well, how could they say it's not punishment? Well, because that's what they were looking at the time. That's how they could say it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we talked about there's a couple states up in the Northeast that have something along those lines. It's like, wow, that would be a piece of cake to just mail in a form. In New York, it's every 2 years, and some states don't have any residency restrictions. You can argue like a state like Florida where there's 2,500 foot restrictions and you're going in 2, 3, 4 times a year. And it's lifetime. That definitely seems like it crosses the barrier of punishment.
I think this would be a good one to have Attorney Richard Gladden, who's been well connected with Texas Voices, the NARSOL affiliate. He's done a lot of legal work and is considered to have a fair amount of expertise. We could probably talk further with him about this. But these people have done what the state of Texas refers to as a deferred adjudication, which was going to make their record go away if they completed their probationary term without any additional consequences. And that's what they bargained for. And then the legislature changed the rules of deferred adjudications. In my state, we don't use that same terminology. We have a conditional discharge. So the person admits the criminality, and then there's no judgment of guilt. They're placed on probation, and then with that conditional discharge dangling, if they complete the probationary period, then there's no registry obligation. Our statute specifically eliminates and carves out that person from having to register. Well, Texas changed their law, where there was a carve out for deferred adjudication, so they carved them in, and that's what this dispute is about. Is because when the agreements that they made. They were under the impression that they were carved out, and they were at that time, but they got put back in.
Right. Where does, I guess, and that's probably the Supreme Court question. When do you cross the line of burdening someone with filling out a form annually to where now you are being forced to comply with being at home at 5 o'clock on Halloween? Where do you cross that line?
Well, we will find out.
Do you think Kavanaugh would be, and Gorsuch being the two newbies on the court, do you think they are in favor of these expanded views, or do you think they would be more in our favor of it's an overreach?
It's hard to say. Typically, if you look at the overall body of decisions, and I've got our great supporter in Nebraska working on the most recent term to see if we can actually get a visual that illustrates that. Typically, the liberal judges are more on our side as far as turning back government overreach. With this particular judge, if Kavanaugh does get seated, it's possible that from what I've read about him, he's actually been on the right side of some criminal justice issues. He's not been a hard-nosed law and order, throw away the book on everything. He's been decent on some things. It could be that this actually helps him to understand the overreach of the powers of the government. I'm always dubious because we had a lesson with Rush Limbaugh, the great conservative talk show host, who has 30 million listeners per week, who was the victim of an overzealous prosecutor, and that's how he got in trouble with his Oxycontin and his prescription misuse. And he ranted and raved about the overzealous prosecutor, but he did nothing in terms of using his 30 million listeners to do something about all the overzealous prosecutors, because we're systemically flawed. It's just a function of American prosecution that we have a lot of overzealous prosecution. And it could be that this justice, if he's seated, this judge as he is now, if he's seated as a justice, it could be that he actually develops a little bit of empathy for people in this position. Or it could be he does the Rush model and goes on with his life and forgets about it. We'll just have to, time will tell.
Right.
But as a general rule, the liberal justices, if you look at the 6-3 decision on the way back in Smith versus Doe. It was the liberals that were in the 3. And if you look at most stuff that we would be concerned about, more often than not, the liberals are going to be on our side, and the conservatives are going to defer more to the law and order and to what the state's doing. But I don't know. I mean, I'm just guessing based on past behavior. Sure. I could be totally surprised. Occasionally, Justice Scalia was on our side, particularly as it pertained to the Confrontation Clause. He was as solid as anybody on the court about the Confrontation Clause. But yet he was a diehard conservative that believed that everybody should go to jail, and he didn't believe that anything was unconstitutional.
Right.
And I'm overstating it, but
I know.
But
it feels then that even in this case, though, that with it being ex post facto, and I guess then it comes into question, if you can prove that it's punitive, then all of the right-leaning justices would then be in our favor because it would be punishment, and they're going to go back to it being like a textualist?
If they hold true to that, and oftentimes people find themselves contorting, trying to find a way to do what they want to do. If they were true to what they claim that they put their hand on the Bible and believe, yes, they would say we can't inflict any punishment after the fact, no matter how worthy the cause is, no matter what the rate of recidivism is, we just can't do it. That's what I would hope for.
Yeah. Yep. Moving on, there is an article from the Boston Globe. Massachusetts juries, psychologists regularly clear sex offenders deemed no longer dangerous, records show. And the article is interesting in that it talks about people who are doing civil commitment, and they may be there for 20 or 40 years. And then 2 of the doctors would clear the individual, saying they're no longer a threat to society. And if 2 of them do that, then they get out, and the victims' advocates kind of go bonkers. I don't think the article said that there had been anyone had recidivated after being released. And if you get a split panel, so if you get one saying yes and one saying no, then you do have the opportunity to take it to court. But it was just an interesting article talking about civil commitment from their angle, from the Massachusetts angle.
It was indeed an interesting article, and it gives me a chance to continue to harp about the victims' advocates. They never ever get enough flesh. After you serve all your time, then after you've been your prison time, then after you've been in civil commitment and lockup, and then when you finally get 2 psychologists to agree that you're worthy of being released, it's still not enough.
Well, we kind of have a lack of faith in scientists or doctors in this country as it is. We have all the anti-vaxxers and so forth running around, homeopathy running rampant. So it kind of doesn't surprise me that when 2 doctors would say that you're free to go, that they would still come back and say, no, you're not free to go. We still want more from you.
Well, but this is after they've done both the prison time
I know
and the civil commitment. This guy is 70 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been confined since the late 70s. Now his crimes don't look all that appealing.
Nope.
But he's 70 years old, and they're saying now that whatever risk he poses, it's consistent or with the overall population.
Right.
And that's not good enough. So you got your prison time. You got your civil commitment time, and you still don't want him out, and he's 70 years old. What else do you want from the man? Just be honest. You want him to never be among us again. That's what you want. So
then why not just give the guy a death sentence from the start?
Well, I think a lot of people would agree with you. That's
to me, I'm trying to take it to a logical extreme. If you never want the guy out, then why not just get rid of them from the start? Then you might enter into the argument. Well, conservatives are generally pro capital punishment, so that probably doesn't even really work in my favor of trying to get them to commit to stepping over the line of what they would be comfortable saying.
Well, the penalty. I mean, you can't go back and increase his penalty now. So the fact that that death penalty was not on the table. Massachusetts is not a death penalty state, so they couldn't give him the death penalty, but. They certainly could, and apparently Governor Baker is asking for harsher sentences going forward because of this. This was not enough. I mean, like I say, he's 70 years old. He's been in the prison since the 70s, or lockup in some form of confinement since the 70s, and it's not enough.
And we're probably the only westernized nation that does this,
as far as I know.
And they have lower crime rates. They have lower costs for prisons. They have lower recidivism rates. So either Americans are just more criminally minded, or our system is botched.
Well, they look at us in disdain from all over the world, and they don't understand why we do what we do.
All right, then. Well, let's move on. I don't think we've ever covered anything from SOSN before, but maybe we have. And they picked up something from NARSOL, and that's how I ended up getting it. But NARSOL has put out a request to receive testimonies from people describing how the registry has penalized them. I think that's probably the shortest way to describe it.
Right.
So I guess I'm just kind of like quote unquote retweeting that they sent this out. So if you can, and this isn't like a bitch and moan session. Oh, this, that, the other thing about the registry. If you can write in to NARSOL describing how, I guess, maybe you can't be with your kids, you can't go to their games. I guess those would be, and you don't make it an emotional appeal, but like the quantifiable human side of things, to where the registry has penalized you for just living. Is that fair way to restate this?
Yes, we've got the compendium for the particular case. NARSOL does have the information, but it doesn't hurt to have more, because the situation of stories may arise again that we need. But this is for a cert petition for U.S. Supreme Court, and it's already, we've got the compendium for this particular case, and we got quite a few.
Okay.
But like I say, it doesn't hurt to send more, even though they won't be used on this particular case. That those have already been compiled.
Alrighty then. Well, then the next article that we're going to talk about is from the Washington Post, and a man accused of kidnapping a woman and masturbating on her is given one pass and won't go to prison. This comes out of Alaska, where a 34-year-old man just a year ago allegedly kidnapped a woman, and then he choked her out, which is kind of also interesting when we were talking about if two consenting adults agree to things. So then she actually comes to, and he says he's finishing his business, and he zips up her pants and says, nah. He said that he needed to be sexually fulfilled. That's why he choked her out. That's just like, I don't know, far past my my ideas of sexual activity. But he only gets, he did a year of house arrest, and then the judge says, hey, you pretty much done all we needed you to do, and moves on.
Put the article in here to illustrate what happens in the plea bargaining process and the individualized attention that we claim we want as advocates. This was a case where the prosecution did not believe it had a very strong case. The allegations sound rather displeasing to the average person. But displeasing allegations have to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, which is what Jackie was pointing out in her comment. And right. That would be a criminal trial and a criminal proceeding. And the prosecution looked at the evidence, and I don't know all of what they looked at. I didn't interview the victim. I don't know how credible that she was, but they concluded that they didn't have a strong case. They concluded on the kidnapping that she got into the car voluntarily, so they could never prove kidnapping, which would have taken off many years off of the charge, because they would have gotten a not guilty on that. They were concerned that they would walk away with no conviction at all, and they believed that he needed help, and they believed it was aberrational behavior because he had no criminal history whatsoever, and therefore they, rather than having him walk away where he wouldn't get that help and go out and harm the community again, or throwing the dice and getting a not guilty on everything, having a clean sweep for the defense, they made a deal, and the deal is he will get treatment, and he has a chance, if this is aberrational behavior, to not engage in any future criminality, and he will not have to register as a sex offender. That's plea bargain at its very finest. It's individualized attention. It's not overzealous prosecution. It's the very things we say we're for in America. as advocates. But yet people are shocked on our side when the prosecution acts reasonably. They look at a case, they make a deal, and they give a person a second chance. I thought that's what we were all about here.
Oh God, I lost my train of thought. Go on with your points.
Well, that was my point. I thought that was what we claimed that we're for as advocates. We don't want all these mandated minimum sentences. We don't want over-the-top prosecutions. We don't want everybody to go to prison for their first offense. And we want someone who needs help to get it. And I thought those were the kind of things that which went into the decision-making process here by the prosecution, the defense attorney, and the judge, and they crafted an outcome which, in everyone's view, is in the best interest of all parties. That's kind of what we say we're for.
Well, what about Brock Turner, though? And similar-ish. This sounds actually kind of worse to me, kind of, sort of, than what he did. And he got the 3-year sentence, and they threw him out of office.
Well, this judge could potentially be facing that type of thing. It depends on what the process is in Alaska, that how judges get on the bench, and if they're subject to the whimsical emotions of the case, high profile, how much of a high profile situation it is. Apparently, it made
right off
the Washington Post, so apparently it's somewhat high profile.
Yeah. So just at face value, so Brock Turner and I don't know the woman's name, they got kind of drunk and they were at a party. He kidnapped a woman. That's the allegation. Kidnapping to me sounds worse than a couple college kids partying and bad things happen.
We've already written off the kidnapping. She voluntarily got it. So there's no kidnapping. That's an overcharge. That's an overcharge. Yep. So, you shouldn't say that he kidnapped, because he didn't kidnap. She got in the car willingly.
Right, but on the flip side, if we read through the charges from the Brock Turner side of things, I'm sure they were not able to prove certain things, so those get a wash too. That he forcibly, I'm sure there was full on penetration.
Well, he did go to trial though. Brock Turner went to trial. He didn't craft a deal.
Okay.
And he was convicted of whatever he was convicted of, and then the probation department recommended the outcome. Now this probation department looked at all the stuff that are supposed to be looked at, including the victim's impact, the criminality of the facts of everything that happened, and they recommended the outcome that Judge Opersky imposed.
Right. I'm trying to find similarities between them, but you keep shooting me down.
Well, the similarities are that it was a outcome that the system thought was desirable and appropriate for the circumstances, and there is an element of the public that's unhappy about it, and which goes into our next article, I think.
It does, totally. It says, so this is from the Post-Register, and it says, analysis. Most sex crime convictions lead to prison sentences. And that's easy just on its own, that the majority of them, the vast majority of them, and I'm going to guess that the majority of people then plead out to it somehow, and they end up with a prison sentence out of them having an allegation of a sexual offense.
Well, this article, what state is this from? Attic County.
Well, since it says the LDS,
Idaho.
It's got to be up that way. Yeah, Idaho State Journal.
Yeah,
the Mormons, man.
Well, he got a significant sentence. He got 10 years of probation.
Right.
That's not a piece of cake. Sex offender probation is not a piece of cake.
No, not normally. So he was a 39-year-old, and he was arrested in January for contacting a 15-year-old girl on Facebook and making plans to meet her for sex, but it wasn't a 15-year-old. Turned out to be a Chubbuck Police Department detective.
Well, and that goes back to what I've said on previous podcasts. This statutory scheme is a solution in search of a problem. The actual teenagers getting propositioned by real adults is so minuscule small that I don't think you could actually register it. If it weren't for these sting operations, we would never have any of these prosecutions, because teenagers are not actually out chatting online with 40, 15, 16, 70-year-old people trying to hook up. They just don't do that. They do not like having sexual rendezvous with people who have fat pot bellies and hair all over their bodies and they just don't find it as a turn on. Now, on the reverse side of that, I'm sure there are older people who would find it enticing that they would do that, but the teenagers are just not chatting with older people trying to have sex. So all these are police sting operations by and large. It's such a small number. I think I might have run into one in my experience.
But doesn't that like legitimately run into the issue of it being entrapment?
Yeah, we go down this path.
I know.
And the problem that happens on this is the people do not back out of this when the person says that they're 15 or whatever that magic number is in your particular state. The person doesn't back out of it because since it's not a 15-year-old, it's an experienced person who's had a lot of psychological training. And these detectives know how to tantalize you, and they know how to say the right things. And the person on the other end, rather than saying, okay, you said you're 15, I'm out of here, never contact me again, they keep chatting. And they keep chatting. At that point, it's not enticement. It's not entrapment. Excuse me. It is enticement, but it's not entrapment.
It's totally enticement.
Because you have shown a predisposition to engage in criminality once you know that you're doing something that's potentially criminal. It's entrapment when you're encouraged to engage in criminality that you never would have thought about. This is in that gray area because would this 39-year-old Russell Talbert, would he have been talking online to anyone other than the police about sex with a 15-year-old? You'd have to
Depends
know
on it, yeah.
You'd have to know the story of what chat room he was in. Was it strictly adult oriented, and was this a person pretending to be a teenager that shouldn't have been there? And then there's a certain amount of disbelief. Well, you sound too smart to be a 15-year-old. They didn't make them like that when I was 15. That's the reaction when you're because they're not 15. The person that's talking to you is a skilled detective that's trying to get you to say the right things, and they're throwing things around like my mom's off now, and Jessica's at soccer practice, and all this kind of stuff that a teenager they're well trained in sounding like a teenager. And
all of those things to me sound like that's entrapment.
But you're still inclined to commit the crime. If you had
anybody of that age is going to be flattered by having the attention of someone that is in their youth and ripe and all that.
Yes, but you actually are not going to be flattering if you're 40 or 50 or 60 years old and got a pot belly and you're hairy from head to toe. They're not going to find you attractive. I hate to burst your bubble. They're not going to find you attractive.
Call my bubble bursted.
I see these people on the what was it, To Catch a Predator, and these guys would send these photos to the would-be teenager that they're talking to, and some of them are like granddad age, and they send the photo, and you're talking to a 50-year-old, and you actually think she or he is going to like you as a sex partner? Really? There's a certain delusionality about that, if there's any such word as that.
You just made it up. We're going to call this podcast Delusionality.
Delusionality. But yes, this particular case, the guy got 10 years probation, and he's got the opportunity for what the people in Texas thought they had a clean record if he gets through this period of whatever they called it. I'm trying to find the word again. There's a word that, but it's kind of like a deferment period. But he's got an opportunity to clean his act up. And again, the Rider program is called, a sentence in which a defendant receives treatment and therapy for a year before being reevaluated by a judge. And this judge typically uses that for first-time offenders. And it's not a guarantee of probation, but it's a chance to prove that you're deserving. And but the judges are saying, hey, we know the entire story. We don't know. You don't know just usually the headlines when you're mad at us. This is the judge speaking. When you criticize us, we've read the psychosexual evaluation. We've read the pre-sentence report. We've got a lot of background that you don't have about the individual, and we're doing what we think is in the best interest of everyone. And then you're getting sound bites. And in fact, a district judge Greg Bowler, says he does not use social media, and he said the public doesn't see much of the information judge used in determining sentence. Pre-sentence investigation reports, psychosexual evaluations are protected by law due to the private nature of the information. And so you just don't know all the stuff that the court knows, and you're not in a position. You're in a position to be emotional and vindictive and angry,
right?
But you're not in a position to know what the best outcome is. That's why we have judges.
And that ties exactly into what the next article is from The Atlantic, and it is talking about how the framers were considering how the government should be laid out, that we shouldn't have mob rule. We have the 3 separate branches, and one of them is completely void of the political process and the politics side of it, that being the SCOTUS side of things. But when you have... I appreciate that we have presidents, starting in Obama really, and now with Trump, that when they say something, you don't have to get it filtered through the media, but there is a certain element of that is attractive, that he can't just rile up the mob, which he's doing with the whole lock her up kind of stuff. And then with this whole trial going on, we are very much in a mob rule era. And there was a paragraph that I captured out of the article. It says, at the moment, the combination of low voter turnout and ideological extremism has tended to favor very liberal or very conservative candidates in primaries, thanks to safe districts created by geographic self-sorting and partisan gerrymandering. Many of these extremists go on to win the general election. Today, all congressional Republicans fall to the right of the most conservative Democrat, and all congressional Democrats fall to the left of the most liberal Republican. In the 60s, at times, 50% of lawmakers had overlapping ideology. But so where we are, I see the idea of having the 3 separate pieces. I think I see how Congress is set up to be very short term, then kind of a medium term, and the justice is being kind of forever, just to have things that can move quickly with political opinion. But then you also have a longer group of people that stick around longer. Then you have the Supreme Court, just to keep things from moving willy-nilly left and right, to have some consistency in it all. And if we only go for simple majorities in the Senate, then you just, you can be super duper partisan and just my team wins. We have to do what my team wants.
Well, that's what Madison feared, that Congress would be the most dangerous branch of the federal government from this article, sucking power into its impetuous vortex. But today he would shudder at the power of the executive branch. They were smart enough to realize the danger of mob rule, and they tried to build checks and balances to prevent us succumbing to mob rule. Unfortunately, we're headed down that path of mob rule, particularly when it comes to the judiciary. When judges are starting to be recalled, I said at the time when Persky got recalled that this is the beginning of a changing judicial independence in this country. When you have to fear that you're going to be overcome by the mob because you do what you think is the right under the circumstances, what do we have to expect from the judiciary going forward?
I struggle with this, and I've asked you about this a bunch. Should the politician do what is right, or should they do what gets them reelected or would be popular at the moment? And that's why we have representative government, is to keep there from being mob rule, so that they would have cool, steady hands. They would have the debate skills to properly vet the idea, not just grab the torches and pitchforks and go after the next demon that we're trying to go after.
Politicians, unfortunately, they should do what's right, but in an elected, when they have to win elections, they have to also do what's popular, and therein lies the problem. It requires a lot of skill to explain things to people that they don't want to have explained to them. When their mind is already lockstep, they've been preached to about, today you tune in what you want to hear. You already, people don't, I'm one of those rare birds that I actually listen to things I don't agree with. Because
I don't know how you listen to what you listen to for so many hours a day.
I listen to what I don't agree with because I need to know what they're saying and what kind of logic or lack thereof that they're using to come up with their viewpoints. And usually it's the lack thereof rather than logic, and it's lack of facts or distorted facts. But most people don't do that. And in order to win re-election, unless we're going to go away from elected system, you have to do you have to kind of do both. You have to do the right thing, and you have to also do what the people want. And it's an amazing politician that can convince people that they're wrong and stand before a crowd and say, you're wrong. This is not who we are, because that doesn't sell well in the next election. When you tell the constituents they've got it wrong, they say, well, actually, we do have it right. You're the wrong person for us.
And so with what's going on, it started in the previous administration with them changing the rules, and then not previous administration, a couple Congresses ago, they started changing the Senate rules to bring the number of votes down closer to 50-50. I just feel that is such a bad idea, that you would totally want to have the majority, as many people represented as possible. So force that threshold back up to 60, or was it 66 for the supermajority, or was it always 60?
At one time it was, and then recently, the recent decades, it's been 60. But that forced, in the U.S. Senate with 100 senators, neither party seldom had 60 seats or more.
Right, but that would force you to find the most middle of the road to make the most people happy. Nobody gets everything that they want, but more people get something that they want.
It did force a more careful scrutiny, because there was compromising when you had the 60 vote majority. But as the article points out, the parties, and we've talked about in this podcast, I've mentioned a number of fairly liberal Republicans at yesteryear, and at one time, right, I called myself a Republican because I believed in those more liberal progressive policies.
You're a conservatard?
They've all but vanished from planet Earth now. We don't have those people anymore in the Republican Party, and the same thing in the Democratic Party. There were a lot of, I could name conservatives. Senator Sam Nunn from your state of Georgia was very conservative. Senator Richard Russell from your state of Georgia was very conservative. Senator Henry Jackson from the state of Washington was a very conservative Democrat. We had Senator Tower from Texas. Senator Benson, Tower was Republican. Senator Lloyd Benson from Texas. I mean, those people would not survive in today's Democratic Party. And conversely, you had liberal Republicans in the Northeast, particularly. You had a lot of liberal Republicans. You had Charles Percy in Illinois. You had on and on names I can call out that would never exist in the Republican Party today.
I forget the Supreme Court justice that was voted in as a pretty conservative at the time, and then over time the bench has moved farther and farther to the right, that he's now considered more of a moderate. That's not Kennedy, is it?
Well, he was one who as time progressed, he was thought to be more moderate, but it's more of a function of how conservative the court's become. He hasn't really changed. Kennedy didn't change that much, but yeah, we went from the liberal Earl Warren court to a much more conservative court. The liberal Warren court has been dying for a long time. It's all but dead now. There's really 3, possibly 4 liberals left on the court, and
right.
So those days where they came out with decisions about the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney, the Gideon decision, those type of things wouldn't happen today. It'd be very unlikely that if we hadn't already established those jurisprudence, we wouldn't have those decisions coming down from the type of court we have today. Clarence Gideon would never get a handwritten petition to the Supreme Court today about his right to counsel. I believe that came out of Florida, if I'm not mistaken, but he would never have gotten that to the Supreme Court. He wanted an attorney, and they told him that except as a capital offense, he didn't have the right to an attorney under Florida law. And he said, well, I think I do under the U.S. Constitution. And he got a handwritten petition to the U.S. Supreme Court.
All right.
I believe that's Gideon versus Wainwright.
All right, for all you people that want to look that up.
Ready to be a part of Registry Matters? Get links at registrymatters.co. If you need to be all discreet about it, contact them by email, registrymatterscast@gmail.com. You can call or text a ransom message to 747-227-4477. Want to support Registry Matters on a monthly basis? Head to patreon.com/Registry Matters. Not ready to become a patron? Give a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Or tell your buddies at your treatment class about the podcast. We want to send out a big heartfelt support for those on the registry. Keep fighting. Without you, we can't succeed. You make it possible.
So moving on to mob rule, Let's play this little clip and see how this goes.
It was a very traumatic situation.
Neighbors are stunned. Police call it one of the most bizarre cases they've seen. A mid-state man goes on a shooting rampage, targeting sex offenders. News 4's Kim St. Onge is live in Hendersonville tonight. So, Kim, why was he targeting them?
Well, according to this report right here, he didn't think they served enough time in prison. It's what the man did before he shot up their homes that's even stranger.
On a mission to get justice, court documents show Robert Sauer searched the sex offender registry and chose two people whose crimes he was particularly disgusted by. He reportedly wanted them to feel fear every night, just like their victims.
We heard 6 pops, one right after the other.
Kathy Chapman lives next door to one of the men, on the registry for trying to rape a child.
Before we knew it, there were red and blue lights everywhere.
Sauer's rampage lasted 4 days. He targeted homes within 3 miles of his own. It started when both men told police their cars were spray painted with words like pervert and rape. One of them reported their mailbox was glued shut. 2 days later, Sauer spray painted one of the cars again and glued the mailbox shut. Then it quickly escalated.
It's so random to go from gluing someone's mailbox shut and then, a couple days later you shoot at their house.
Sauer shot multiple times. 2 of the bullets went through one of the homes. Police say Sauer admitted to the crimes. Court documents show when asked if he knew he could have killed the men or their families, Sauer said, quote, "Well, I can't argue with the facts."
It's one thing to have your own personal beliefs and thoughts about things like that, but that's up to the justice system.
Sauer is in the Sumner County Jail tonight, charged with a long list of crimes. The most serious, attempted murder. Tom, Tracy?
Kim St. Onge tonight. Kim, thanks.
So that comes out of Tennessee. So like I said, speaking of mob justice.
Well, that's an example of why the registry shouldn't exist, and certainly not in its present form with home addresses on the internet. That's and this is not the first time this has happened. This happens on a relatively routine basis. He's one of the rare ones who proclaims that he's harassing and acting against a person because they're on the registry. Usually law enforcement says, well, we can't draw a direct connection. They happen to be on the registry, but he made the proclamation, so it's difficult for him to hide his motivation. But this is the tragedy of being on the registry. Suppose he had innocent children in there. I wonder if he would have still shot into the house. Maybe his spouse or girlfriend would said, okay. First of all, it's not okay to do mob justice. It's not okay to do vigilantism. It's certainly not
right.
Mob justice. I think that's a mischaracterization. But vigilantism, what is he thinking?
Well, he's thinking that our people have done something heinous and they didn't get enough, so he wants more.
And who is he to determine what's enough?
Obviously, the man with the gun and the crazy glue.
But
crazy
you see
glue,
how
man.
when I tell people that these things can escalate, they think I'm a paranoid person. But
oh no, I totally understand what you're saying.
When I tell people that just because all they did was did this today, don't think it can't escalate. And look how quickly
if they don't see results from it, they may escalate.
Look how quickly that escalated
in a couple days. And so what are you supposed to do as the registry? Your information is out there. So you take the approach that I did, and I had to put cameras up just to have some level of protection against myself. Not that it's necessarily protection. I mean, if a bullet's coming through your door, it's coming through your door whether you're there or not.
Well, what we do is we keep litigating and we keep fighting and we keep educating, legislating and educating. We keep doing all those things. And hopefully the American people will begin to come to their senses that what we're doing is wrong.
Well, then let me ask you this question. Do you think, can you use stories like this as evidence against the registry at large? Absolutely.
That this is a continuing trend of there's been people who have been killed because of the registry, and the killers have proclaimed that that's why they did it.
Right. I mean, we covered something 20 or so episodes ago, like a homeless guy, and then his girlfriend was there, and I think the guy killed both of them. That was roughly episode 30 or so.
Yeah, there's been some in Maine, Washington State, and I think South Carolina Governor Haley was Ambassador Haley was governor at the time, and it's all too too often occurrence. And then these are just where they've proclaimed it. There are hundreds of them where they don't proclaim it, but yet things happen to people in the registry. And law enforcement says, well, we don't see that the registry, they're not going to say it's the direct cause. They say, well, it's a coincidence. This one just happened to proclaim that that's why he did it.
I wonder, Hank, this is a call to you. I wonder if there's any studies done on, the normal population would have a certain death rate, homicide rate and so forth like that. I wonder if our people have any of those higher. Suicide's going to be higher, but I'm not referring to those. Well, I mean, I guess it would kind of apply, because if you start getting harassed, maybe you end up depressed and you take extreme actions.
Well, why don't you ask USSAA? They seem to have a policy related to that. They may have some statistics. So why don't you ask them?
Maybe that's why they're canceling people's policies?
That very well may be. They may already have the statistics to show exactly what you're asking.
That's interesting. And not to not to circle back around to the Supreme Court, but just there was another article in the Washington Post from George Will, who's as you've pointed out, a very conservative pundit, and it says the Supreme Court was America's least damaged institution until now. And here the last two justices, I don't remember hearing anything like this for the previous two, for Sotomayor and I've lost her name.
Elena Kagan.
Thank you. I don't remember hearing this much problems, but the last two, there've just been untold, not so much with Gorsuch, but still, because that came on the heels of the death of Scalia. But then this guy, there's just so much politics and just nastiness going around to bring up that you generally think of the Supreme Court as being way, way high on the, they're going to debate, they're going to look for the evidence, and there's not just this whole political just nastiness, but here we are.
Well, now the two women justices, now you have to remember, women are pure as the wind-driven snow. Therefore, there would not be anything improper in their background that would ever.
You've got to think that that's just because that's generally how people think of their mothers, and every woman is then the mother of somebody, just about. Right. So that's why you think that.
So, well, I mean, isn't it true that women are pure as the wind-driven snow?
Absolutely, all the way.
Absolutely. Okay, so there would be nothing to find in their in Kagan or Sotomayor's background, because they're pure as the wind-driven snow. So we would have to go back a little bit further.
And RBG's been around since there was snow.
But this with Gorsuch, there was nothing like this, other than that there was anger over it being a stolen seat. In my opinion, it is and was a stolen seat.
I agree with you. I think it's total politics.
So I think that the anger was justified, because the president. The Constitution doesn't say that a president shall nominate justices to the federal courts except for in their final year of office. Mm-hmm. That was something McConnell and the Republicans invented. It had never been done before. Now they'll say that Joe Biden said something to that effect, but it was never put into practice. He made a comment along that line that if there should be a vacancy in the final year of the Bush presidency, that shouldn't be filled. But it never came to fruition that ever happened. But nothing like this. This is far beyond whatever happened, even with Clarence Thomas back in '91.
Well, it's there you go. So now the Supreme Court has been a tarnished institution, just like the presidency and Congress. So
I don't know.
Good times, man.
I don't know how we survive this. The continued degradation of our institutions. I don't know how we recover if we don't have faith in our government, and all three branches are considered negative, and our institutions that we used to look up to are all tarnished. How do we continue to function if everything is in this condition?
Well, I asked you this when somewhere back around Gorsuch. I asked you, what is the response from Democrats to them doing that? And you said you have to do it back. But doesn't someone have to just say, look, we're just going to have to call a truce. Everyone's effed up. We're going to put back the 66 people, and we're just going to have to learn to get along. Can't we get to that?
I just don't know. We've been hearing calls for civility for a long time, and it seems to like that it's getting more shrill and more polarized. I just don't know if we can.
The ones who seem to be extending those kind of ideals are then just freaking bashed on Twitter or some other method for being the ones that are reaching across to the evil other side.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I don't know that we can. You had a group of 6 or 8 senators that were trying to work in a bipartisan fashion, and they got vilified. And look how McCain got vilified, and he was one on the Republican side that tried to be reasonable. And it's I don't know if we can. That's
who I was referring to actually, but. So can it? So a friend of mine also then says, just put them all on the gallows, just wipe them all out, start over. That was his suggestion. I was like, I don't think that's a reasonable suggestion, but that's a suggestion. If we can't get there any other way, then just clean the slate and wipe and start over.
Well, there are people who believe that voting all the scoundrels out of office, but that doesn't change who we are. This is a reflection largely of us.
Yes.
So we are getting reflected back to us who we are.
Absolutely. That's really disturbing.
If people were calling their congressperson and demanding, in this case it'd be the Senate, but if everybody was calling their senators and saying, we are sick of this and we want you people to focus on the issues about the judicial philosophy, his temperament, his understanding of the law, his American Bar Association ratings. We want to look at his credentials. I mean, not to say that they shouldn't look at character. Character matters for important positions, but this has gotten so ugly. The 36-year-old allegations. And
well, then let's tie that into the next article and the final article of why Maryland police aren't investigating the Kavanaugh allegations. And the I think second paragraph. Where did it go? It says there's nothing to investigate. There's no criminality. You just have an allegation.
That's where
in there that I wanted to capture.
Yeah, that's where I want to try to be as gentle as I can, because I know there's a lot of our listeners and they're split on this on both sides. The police are not. The police can only become involved when there's evidence of criminality and a complaint of crime. The police don't go out and generate reports. I mean, except for when they actually witness criminality take place. But the police have not received a victim, a complaint about any misconduct of a sexual nature from Ms. Blasey Ford. How do you pronounce her name? Blasey Ford? They haven't received any. They haven't received any complaint. So there's nothing for them to investigate. And if they were to receive a complaint, there would be very little evidence that they could look at now, all these decades later. And that's the tragedy. If this did occur and it wasn't reported, it makes justice impossible. And justice is not just, it doesn't just mean locking a person away. Justice means a fair process where the accused has an opportunity to not be convicted on mob justice with some kangaroo court. There's no way that a person can get a fair trial 36 years later. And even though I would rather him not be appointed, I'd rather that my candidate be making the appointment. This is totally not fair to him.
Sure.
It's not fair to come in 36 years later and make these allegations, and there's no way, well, since they've reopened an FBI investigation, I better backpedal a little bit. It's going to be difficult to really to establish anything one way or the other. And I was having a conversation with a colleague this morning about, well, sexual assault victims have the right to be believed. And I said, well, no, actually they don't. The police are supposed to be neutral investigators. They're supposed to come in. I said, well, let's just pretend you had the expensive, you wouldn't have the Hope diamond, but assume you had an expensive diamond or some pearl, and you called the police and you said, my house got broken into. And the police dispatch, and they come to your house and they see that there's no signs of a break-in. And they said, well, your house got broken into. The physical evidence doesn't reflect that. What are you missing? Well, I'm missing this expensive diamond. Well, do you have the right to be believed, or or is it the police's duty to ask you, well, do you have any evidence of that diamond? Well, yes, I do. I have pictures of it. I've worn it. It's been in my family for this many years, and I've got this picture, and I've got an insurance policy on it. And okay, well, now you've got some evidence of the diamond. All right. Then the police have to look at motivators. Well, okay, so you've got this expensive diamond. Is it possibly that the person's trying to collect an insurance premium here?
Right.
A policy payout. The police's job is to look at everything critically. They're not supposed to be on your side. I'm sorry to burst your bubble on that. They're supposed to come in and look for evidence of a crime before they have jurisdiction. And then they're supposed to see if the crime can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And in a case like that, they would probably start looking for the diamond. Once they were convinced that one was missing, they would say, well, it doesn't appear to be a break-in. Is it possible that someone that knew you took it, that had a key, or did you leave your door open? These are all legitimate questions to ask in a course of investigation. Well, sexual crimes happen more often with people that are known to the victim. I think we all agree on that.
Yeah.
Far fewer of them are from strangers, which means that questions are going to have to be asked about the relationship that was had, it existed, what the circumstances were that led up to the situation. That's not re-victimizing the person. That's getting as much information as you possibly can to determine if a crime actually did occur. All sex that occurs is not criminal. Wouldn't that be great if every sexual act that occurred it was criminal? But it's not that way.
No, that would not be great. That would not be great.
So when you say that and when there's a relationship where sex occurred, then you get into a lot murkier position when it's not a stranger situation, because the stranger one is a lot more cut and dry. If you never knew the person and they had their head covered and they were disguised and you think you don't know them, but when it's in a relationship, there's no license to have sexual activity when it's not wanted, but it gets a lot murkier in terms of where the lines get a little blurry about what constitutes permission. And it's gotten where now you almost have to have a video of yes. Let me see.
Right.
I'm going to go to this step. Now, do I have your permission? Okay, I'm recording that. I mean, we've gotten to that point, and I don't mean to sound uncaring, but I was telling my colleague I was a victim of a violent crime in the year 1992, and I didn't have enough evidence, and the person went free because I didn't have any. All I had was my word against the attacker. It wasn't a sex crime, but it was a violent crime. I ended up with several stitches, an emergency room visit, and I didn't have the evidence, and there was no charges because my word was all the evidence there was.
Do you think do you know what the reason for this particular segment of criminality be isolated out the way it is?
And what do you mean by isolated out?
Well, it seems that sex crimes in particular are the ones that are being focused on for having the statute of limitations removed. These ones are so where the victim can't be re-traumatized. It seems to be very much isolated into this little group of crimes are this way.
Well, because their advocates have won the day in terms of the discussion. They come in and they put on very emotional presentations about, and they have experts that come in and talk about sophisticated things like repressed memory.
Right.
And what can you do when you're sitting in the legislature and they're telling you that all these bad things happened to them 40 years ago, 30 years ago, and they were too traumatized to come forward? The only answer is to make it possible. What I say is, well, I'm really terribly sorry, but we can't be fair to the other side. And our system is built on fundamental fairness, and we cannot give that person a fair trial all these decades later. So it's really tragic. I hope we can provide you the help you need, and hopefully you can live the remainder of your life as productive as possible. That's not the answer that the average politician is going to be able to give, because you get vilified in the next campaign. Well, this senator says that victims don't matter. You heard what was said to Jeff Flake when he announced he was voting for. In committee, he was going to vote to move the nomination along. Did you hear about the people that confronted him and said that he doesn't care?
I didn't hear that. No.
Okay. Well, I
heard about it like from another standpoint.
Yes. Well, it's difficult. When they descend on the Capitol and they demand that, it's very difficult to push back because they're very emotional and they're very compelling. And there's very few people on our side saying, well, wait a minute. The founding fathers intended, you're talking about putting a person in a cage for a very long time in very cruel conditions. It is supposed to be hard to put a person in a cage. That's the way they designed it. And
even in this case, though, because they've come out and I don't know to what degree they've tarnished his character, but he's definitely been slandered to some degree, and he now definitely he's not going to be a Supreme Court justice where you go, God, what was that guy in 2018? You're totally going to know who Kavanaugh is forever.
Well, if these allegations, and I'm not pronouncing one way or the other, I'm not going to say I believe or don't believe. They're just too old. I take a purist view of like I do with the registry. You can't inflict punishment. It's unconstitutional. Doesn't matter what the recidivism rate is. You can't give this person a fair process 35 years later in a criminal setting. I'm dubious about how fair this process has been, although I think that they tried to make it fair by giving everybody their say. I'm dubious about how fair this process has been as well, because you can't respond to something that's so lacking in details. I mean, he had his journal and his diary there, and as best
he had his calendar of all the parties that he's been to.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, he seems to have a immense love for alcohol, which concerns me. That seemed to be apparent. And is it possible that if he was drinking alcohol excessively, that there'd be things he would not remember? From my understanding, yes, that would be possible. But even if he did it, he was a youngster. It's not justifying it, not saying it's okay, but we have to look a little bit at his ensuing decades of how he's lived his life. And you'd think that there would be more surfacing if he was a serial abuser and not just a drunken, stupid college kid that groped a person. Now, let me just honestly ask you, I don't want an answer, but how many people can say that they have never done any flashing or any trying to get to another base? They've never done anything that by today's standards, if they were analyzed through today's rigid standards of sexual behavior, have not done anything that's over the top. I don't think any of your listeners out there can say you haven't.
Do you think that this whole process has brought anything to light that is in our favor? Throwing this guy on trial just by public opinion, do you think any of that has, I know that they had the 1,000 victims in the Archdiocese in Philadelphia. Those things are 30 and 40 years old just the same. Do you think this has brought any of that to light to help us in any way?
Possibly. It may be illuminating the need to restore the proper balance, particularly in the criminal setting. And like I say, this is not a criminal proceeding here.
Right.
This is
a job interview.
A job interview, correct. This is essentially a fitness for Supreme Court, a part of the constitutional role of advice and consent that the Senate has. But hopefully that something good will come out of this, that we will realize that we've gone just a little bit too far. And I even said that about the policies that they're at the Department of Education is looking at revising in terms of how campus assaults are investigated and what the due process. They're actually, if they actually succeed in putting those policies in place, it'll restore some balance of due process, and perhaps maybe this will restore some balance. Let's hope. Let's hope something good comes out of it.
Let's hope. Well, that's all I got. You have anything else?
That's all you've got?
That's all. That's it. We've been on this for an hour and 20 minutes almost.
That's ridiculous.
I know. Who would want to listen to us for an hour and 20 minutes?
I'm surprised, but they keep doing it. And how do they get in touch with us and support us? And how do we grow this podcast? Because I want to have, by the turn of the 2019, I want to have doubled our audience from today.
Oh, well, that's an interesting goal. I appreciate that. Well, first, I will re-thank our Patreon supporters, but share it. So the 500,000 of you that do listen to it, why don't you share it with someone that you know on the registry, off the registry, someone that would maybe benefit from this? Actually, I should tell you about that. We got somebody on Twitter reached out and said that he found Emily Horowitz from the debate that she did And then through a couple of the links, he ends up on ours, and he said it is an awesome podcast, and he really appreciates it, and it's been very illuminating for him, and I super duper appreciate that. But the website is registrymatters.co, and call in. You can leave a voicemail question, and David, you're supposed to do that, so you owe me a question on a voicemail message, and that's 747-227-4477. Shoot a question or contact us by email at registrymatterscast@gmail.com. And of course, the best way to support the podcast is over at patreon.com/registrymatters. And I think that's all I got.
Well, in addition, I would say that give us feedback in terms of the topics
Certainly.
that we cover and what we should be covering, we're not covering, and what we're belaboring that you've heard enough about, because we're trying to help you, the listener.
Absolutely.
And if we're not getting it, we won't know unless you tell us.
Yep.
And if you think we should sign off altogether, tell us that also.
Just send in the acronym FYP, and we will know exactly what you mean.
But I do appreciate the positive feedback that we do get, and if it's not positive, that would be good also. We try to be as fair as we can, and believe it or not, if we're getting it wrong, we want to know about it, and that's what I guess why we got the birth certificate. And
yes, that's right, because we don't want to have any conspiracy theories here.
and also we got the feedback from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, but
yes.
I appreciate all the feedback we get.
Well, have a great night, Larry, and I will talk to you soon.
Thanks, Andy.